Hey everybody, my name is Pasta and welcome to an episode of Games Under Construction, E-Edition. In this series, we'll be taking a look at games in early access or on sites like Patreon to see if there's something to check out right away or something to keep your eye on. This is a review of Karryns Prison. Now before we get started, I want to talk about my rules when it comes to these types of games. Rule 1, it has to be an actual game. Self-explanatory. Rule 2, quality. In other words, the game has the goal to be an actual fun-working game, not just pink material. That'll be finished in less than 30 minutes. Now, when it comes to these types of games, assault will come up at some point, especially the ones with combat. Which leads me to Rule 3. Assault must be avoidable. To clarify even more, it's a loss condition, and it's not an option for the player. If it doesn't meet those two, well then, it's out. That said, let's get on with the review. Okay, now, what's the setup? After being summoned to Fort Gannon, yes, really, what is supposed to be the worst prison in the Empire, not as in it has the toughest criminals or it has the toughest mentality towards its inmates, but it's run so poorly inmates see it as a resort, and criminals even commit petty crimes to hopefully be thrown into the prison. The Emperor and his Imperial Secretary, Karen, not that one, go to inspect the prison, at which, after arriving at the prison gates, they meet the prison's warden, Yasu, who then informs them that there's a conspiracy among the prisoners to take over the prison in a riot and then take over the Empire. Which happens right after he mentions it. After a prisoner makes it out of the front gates, Karen easily defeats them. After demonstrating her skills, Yasu suggests that Karen becomes the new warden to stop the prisoner's plot. The Emperor agrees, but Karen doesn't, in which after some verbal trickery from the Emperor, Karen reluctantly agrees. With Yasu as her deputy warden to assist her, she must now restore order to Fort Gannon's 5 levels, and in the process stop the conspiracy to coup the Empire. Not the deepest of tales, which the gameplay more than makes up for, as it has a whole rooms, dedicated to explaining its mechanics, which I won't be going entirely over as I feel the game's tutorial rooms are there for understanding the deeper parts of gameplay if help is needed. So I'll be going over the gameplay's broader main points. I would also like to clarify in the current demo version 8 there are only 4 floors of 5. I'll respect the developer's wishes and won't be showing anything from 4th floor, and most of the footage and gameplay is from version 7. So the goal of the game and much of what you'll be doing will subjugating the rioting prison floors one by one, each getting tougher as you beat one floor after another. The method of which you'll be stopping the rioting prisoners is kicking the shit out of them. Mainly at first, but we'll get to that. Now with combat, for the sake of time, I will be trying to summarize as much as I can, as going over every element of combat would make this video longer than it needs to be. When in combat, you will go against a random amount and variety of enemies in waves. Combat itself is turn-based, where at the beginning of a turn you have 2 phases. The first phase is a mental phase, where you use willpower for buffs or debuffs. The second phase is actions, where you can attack or use skills that use stamina or energy respectively. Do be mindful, as stamina and energy are your 2 health bars in fights, and if you lose stamina, you are knocked down, unable to make any actions and retaliate. This leaves you as Karen more open to enemies for them to strip you and do sensual actions towards Karen. And if you lose all energy, you lose the battle. Now there are only 2 ways to lose energy. The first way you'll mainly lose energy is using skills in the action phase, as they require the use of energy. The second is when Karen's bar reaches 100% from enemies' sensual attacks, which leads to her... Yeah. This will not only cause you to lose energy, but also affect your max energy overall. The only way to recover your energy is by using an unlockable edict skill, but we'll come back to those later. Now, along with managing stamina and energy, you also have to manage Karen's desires, which rise over time. Karen will allow, the dev's words not mine, enemies to inflict sensual attacks on her, depending on the height of a specific desire, which there are 5. These desires, of course, are...
Cock.
Mouth, chi-chis,
Vagina.
butt. The desires they raise are pretty self-explanatory, and depending on the amount of desires one or more have, it can escalate from groping to full-on ho. To simplify several aspects quickly, essential attacks from the enemies don't do much early on to the pleasure bar desires, but over time you gain passives which make the game harder mainly in how much desire and pleasure you gain, as you will not have the necessary skills or stats to counteract enemies. So trying to defeat enemies as quickly as possible and keeping clothes on as long as you can is your best strategy. Along with if you feel the situation is bad enough, running away is an option. Now, eventually with enough passes and desires, you do unlock the option to defeat enemies sensually, but doing so makes gaining pleasure and losing energy faster. If you do lose in combat, you will be brought to one of several rooms depending on the floor, where you'll be put into a sensual endurance match that works like combat. Regardless if you win or lose, you lose access to your weapon and are virtually unable to fight in combat as your attacks are so weak they are ineffective. So let's talk about the other half of the gameplay, management. Let's start with the 4 statuses you'll be keeping an eye on. Order, control, fatigue, and plaisir. Order is the prison's and most importantly, your actual life bar. If it reaches 0, it's game over. This leads us to control, whereas after each in-game day, you'll either lose or gain order depending on your control. Losing control can be counteracted in 2 ways. The first is winning battles, as each time you win, you gain a certain amount of order. The second method is using edicts that affect both order and control. There's also a side job that can help with order, but we'll come back to that along with edicts proper. Now the third status you'll really need to keep an eye on is fatigue, as in after every battle, you'll gain fatigue. That along with doing side jobs. Yet again, we'll come back to those along with edicts. When it comes to fatigue, the more you gain, the more your stats will be negatively affected. So much so when you get to 50% fatigue, you are no longer able to run away from battles. Speaking of running, if you do decide to run away from battles along with doing sensual actions, or if you lose and go into a defeat room, you gain a lot more fatigue. Now there is only one way to lose fatigue, and that's in sleeping in either your room or in a guard room in one of the floors. The last of the statuses you'll need to keep an eye on is pleasure, as it doesn't just go away after each battle, but it carries over throughout the entire day, and there are only 2 ways to get rid of it. The first method is by, like fatigue, sleeping for the day, although this is if the pleasure percentage is below 30%. The second method is for if you have over the 30% pleasure status, as the more your pleasure status is before you decide to go to bed at the end of the day, the less fatigue you'll be able to gain back for the next day. So then you have the option of then using method number 2 of going to Karryns' room or a guard room if you're in the middle of a floor to get rid of the amount of pleasure for the day. This will involve Karryn flicking the bean, as it were, and there is a chance that enemies will invade the room that you're in depending on how much noise you make, so this does carry a risk and do be aware of that. Now there is a safer way of doing method number 2, but that's a side job and I'll get more into those when we get there. Okay, let's finish management and gameplay for that matter, talking about edicts. Edicts are used to do several things, the main of which is running the prison. Edicts are segmented into 2 types. Personal edicts that affect stats, teach new skills, and get equipable items. Prison edicts are how you decide to run the prison. These edicts are used to help with order, increase control, increase profits, deal with expenses, keep levels that you've subjugated from rioting, and how to treat prisoners affecting their stats and how they act in battle. They also allow the ability to do side jobs, with each job having a different purpose that mechanically work like normal battles, but with small twists. The bar side job gives you the opportunity to work at the bar and earn tips. The secretary's side job allows you to earn order by processing visitors. And the second floor bathroom stall, which, though it isn't an actual job, functions like the other 2, qualifying in the fact that it's a type of mini-game that functions as a way to lessen fatigue. The bathroom side job also has 2 other functions. The first one is that if you decide to, like I mentioned earlier, flick the bean in this room, you will have the ability to safely get rid of pleasure status without having enemies barge in. The other thing you can do with it is that you can relieve inmates here and increase staff productivity, making more money. And with that, I'm finally done talking about gameplay. Okay, before I get into my critiques, I do want to say I've skipped over quite a few things for the sake of brevity, some examples being the agility axe system, money management, resubjugating rioting floors, enemy types, the triad weakness system, hidden desires and sensitivities, etc. But with that said, that's what I like about this game, is the depth of its content. There are quite a number of factors to consider, and the game always gave me quite the challenge. On normal mode anyways, which is called Warden mode here, Much of what I've shown is from Secretary or Easy mode, where much of the fun and challenge is lost as it becomes a walk in the park. A good example of the difference in difficulty between normal and easy mode is how long it took me to get to level 4 and beat level 3. On normal, it took me 54 hours, 54 minutes, and 60 seconds. That's counting the fact that I also lost, so I started from the beginning. So yeah, on easy mode, it didn't even meet half that. It isn't even over 10 hours on easy mode. Now, I did mention that even though the difficulty is a fun part of the game, that doesn't mean it can't be annoying at times, and I do feel the game does need quite a few rebalances and quality of life changes to help the player out before the game releases, as this game at times doesn't really give you enough room to fall and quickly get back up, as if you do mess up, you can mess up pretty hard and lose and game over on level 1. So be careful. Now, what I mentioned beforehand feels more like nitpicks to me personally. I'm not gonna cry if it isn't made me a tad easier, if there isn't more quality of life changes. But if there was something I feel like really needs to be changed, it would be edicts that concern treatment of prisoners. The way I want these edicts changed is the fact that I want to be able to switch out one of the 3 various ways you can treat the certain types of enemies that the edicts concern. As for 2 major reasons. The first is that in terms of all the other edicts, it doesn't make sense that you can't change how you treat the prisoners. Other edicts make sense that you can't change them because there are rooms that you're not just going to destroy just because it's cheaper or some other weird reason. There are edicts that you can change and switch out. I don't see why prisoners aren't one of them. And the second is that it kind of kicks you in the rear later on for a really good edict if you don't have the precise edicts that concern treatment of prisoners. So it really hurts the player for not being able to see that coming their first time playing. Personally, I feel if the reason for not changing how you treat prisoners comes down to balancing, then the way to balance that would be allowing the player to make their choice once, and then if they want to switch them out, it costs more to switch out how you treat prisoners. Or there's something specific you need to do. Something like that. So yeah, that's all I have to say for Karryns Prison, and I highly recommend checking it out on the developer Subscribestar, where you can find their free demo for Karryns Prison that goes as far as level 2. If that scratches your itch and you want to play more, subscribe to Rementary and stay up to date in the most current version. Or, if you wanted to wait for its release and didn't want to subscribe to the devs, you can put it on your wishlist on Steam. Now, before you go to the devs Subscribestar page and shout, "Shut up and take my money," the devs have stated that they will release one last alpha version before releasing it fully on Steam. Even if you are subscribed to them on Subscribestar, you'll only be able to get the full version on Steam. So keep that in mind, along with the fact that the free demo isn't the most representative of the most current version of the game, as many changes have been made to the game with each update, major and minor. Along with the fact, obviously, the game isn't done. With that being the case, if you find a bug, hop over to the Discord and let the devs know about it. While you're there, you can chat with others about the game and make suggestions, give feedback, and if you want some help, there's a Stats and Builds channel. And that's all I have to say on Karryns Prison for the time being, as I'll give the game another look when it comes out. Also, if you feel like supporting me and my content, you can go ahead over to Patreon, where you can find the uncensored version of this review. Not to mention, it'd be a great help, as due to recent events, I'm going to start pushing my Patreon a bit more. So, yeah. And if you don't feel like doing that, you could always head over to my channel and hit that subscribe button or like the video. Now, due to YouTube's fickle nature, I can't leave any direct links to Karryns Prison creators, but I will leave a search engine link so that you can find them easily in the description below. There will also be a description of my Patreon in there as well. Thank you very much for watching.